Welcome back to the Darius Gant Show. I'm your host, Darius Gant, as well as founder and CEO of Tesoro AI, where we help innovative founders and executives scale their AI solutions and AI teams. On this podcast, we focus on cutting-edge technology, more specifically, artificial intelligence, by getting up close and personal with visionary AI founders and executives. We learn what AI is actually solving in the real world. We also dive deeply into what these founders and executives have done to build these AI solutions and AI teams. In this episode, we sit with Jason Smith, who is the co-founder and CEO of Klue. Klue is a competitive intelligence platform that enables competitive research and delivers sales battle cards to your enterprise sales teams. The company is high growth and recently received an award, or I should say recognition, from Deloitte as a part of Deloitte's Fast 50 companies to look out for. Jason himself is a 5-time startup entrepreneur. As the president of a company by the name of Vision Critical, he grew that team from just a few employees to 500 plus employees. You'll love Jason's transparent nature as he breaks down his successes and failures and really walks us through what it has taken for him to build a successful AI startup. Jason takes time out of his day to mentor startup companies as well as aspiring entrepreneurs. So I'm sure you'll get a lot of value out of today's conversation. If you or your team is building an AI solution or has plans to do so, be sure to reach out to our team here at Tesoro AI. We've assembled leading experts in machine learning and data science. So whether it's AI strategy, data labeling, custom AI software development, or staff augmentation, we've got a strong team here that has your back. Make sure you head over to www.tesoroai.com. All right, without further ado, let's hop into the show and hear from Jason. All right, Jason, thanks for joining us today. I saw that earlier this year, not too much earlier, but you all were able to close on a sizable Series A round. Congratulations on that.
Thanks for that.
How does it feel to be able to finally focus on running the business versus raising capital?
Yeah, there's funny. Raising capital is never fun. It's such a distraction from the business, but it's, you need it when you're building a SaaS business. So it's, well, for my type of SaaS business anyway. So really nice to have it behind me, and also really happy about the partners that we have on board that put the money into the company. And that's often overlooked. One thing is the money. The other is, are they any good? And can they help you? And I'm absolutely seeing those new venture investors come to the table with a lot more than just the money.
Yeah, that's awesome. I remember it used to be just about who can write me a check, but now, especially with it being so much more competitive in the venture community, it's about, well, how can you help us to get to the next level? How can you help us to scale?
Yeah, especially when you have operator VCs, versus lifetime finance VCs. As an entrepreneur, you can relate to those people more, and they can tell the story of, oh, you're just like what we experienced when we were building Yammer, and here's a playbook that we were running, and you're like, wow, that could be similar to a playbook I could run.
Right.
And that's wonderful, and it feels much more, there's more gravitas to that than I was sitting on a board of another company and they mentioned they did this, right? So generally those operator VCs are well aligned for entrepreneurs, particularly when they've done something in your space. But it's also just introductions, right? Where are good people? What tools should you use? Should you open an office somewhere else? Like, how do you approach that? What about hiring? What are salary comps? You get all these advantages that when you're bootstrapping, it's hard to get access to.
Now, did you all come through an accelerator, or was that, or did you raise a seed round in some other way?
Yeah, no, we did our trajectory. So both my co-founder and I, we've done a couple things before. So we had the fortune of taking a PowerPoint deck to angel investors and getting enough money to be able to build on the vision that you're presenting in that deck. And then fairly quickly, it moves to, now can clients pay for this? Does anyone care? And so your talk disappears and it becomes real. And then we raised a seed round. Our first institutional seed round was 4 million. And then the most recent round was 15 million. And that's purely on the back of metrics now. Like, are you doing it? Do clients really care? And there's core SaaS metrics that people look at, and you got to be in that ballpark. And then also they have to buy into, your vision of how big this thing could become, right? Venture capitalists don't want to build a small business. They've got to believe it can be massive.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious about your personal background as you think about leading up to what you did with Klue. What were, some of the checkpoints you hit in your career that gave you the basis to be able to build out Klue?
Tons of mistakes, tons of stupid things. I think there's so much learning in the failures that you have. So this is my 5th startup. 2 have been successful, 2 have been failures. And arguably one of them is still going, but let's call it a failure. And I think you learn so much in the successes and you learn a lot more in the failures. And I think anybody that tells you the success came because they were brilliant and had thought it all through, I think is full of crap. I think there's a lot of hard work that creates the earned luck, but you need a lot of the luck to line up and get you into the right position at the right time. I think when I think about Klue and starting now, the learning from all of my previous pain came to bear, right? Like in my first company, it was early days internet, and we were absolutely looking at it going, we should go get these clients to build web applications for them. Instead of getting tons of clients, we focused on a handful of clients. And I'm talking like people didn't have websites, Darius, back then. So you like, this is a time when you should be flag planting and like trying to expand, not just be tight and focused and think way bigger, right? Like we were in Canada. So instead of thinking about a local company, why not Verizon? They don't have it. So go big and think big. And that was something that I carried with me now, but didn't know back then in my first company. Other learnings where you really want the timing. There's another failed business. Like we tried to start something before the social graph really took off with social media. And we tried to do basically a Groupon before Groupon, but it was way too early. So if you and I wanted to buy a nice watch and 50 of our friends did, and we took that aggregated committed demand to somebody selling that watch and said, give us all a deal, the infrastructure wasn't there to do that. And you and I would have to email 50 of our friends. There was no social, like, hey, I'm trying to, so like timing is so important. You got to look at the trends and how they dovetail and figure out when to start your business. And so I know this podcast is a lot about AI and ML. There's a lot of stuff that you can get ahead of yourself in that trend and waste a lot of money on sophisticated work on the ML arena. And frankly, not deliver enough value for a customer to pay for it. It might be on a progression curve there, but not up front. So all learnings.
Yeah, that last point you made is actually very valuable. And it reminds me of a point, Maha Ashur, she is the founder, CEO, and CTO of MetaWave, but they're in the autonomous driving space. And she mentioned something similar where you got hype around certain technologies, but then you have to make sure that hype aligns with readiness, right? And in her case, it was like, okay, are people actually ready to write a check to move forward? In your case, as well, is the infrastructure ready for us to be able to properly push forward our product? I'm curious, as you thought about Klue, then what pain point did you spot where you said, right time, right place, infrastructure's there, here's what I see?
Yeah, well, the pain came from, I was president of a SaaS company previous to this, and it was maybe 500 people. We had 100 sales people scattered around the world, and we were pitching our idea, our product, to a whole bunch of prospects. And these prospects were increasingly becoming more educated, having read about our competitors in the market and what the offers are online, seeing different comparison sites pop up. And they were frankly catching our salespeople off guard. So tell me how, again, you compare to, why are you different than, no, I got a demo from them and they do that really well. Show me exactly. And salespeople were just caught off guard. And so I was super frustrated by that and wanted knowledge about what my competitors were doing. And internally we had a wiki, we had email, and there was not a lot of dynamic content flowing in. There's a lot of posted emails. Back then it was Yammer, but think Slack, chat conversations. And it was awesome to build a wiki up front about what the competitors were doing, but then it got out of date really quickly. And so nothing we were doing was working to equip the rest of the organization. with the knowledge about their competitors. And so I started looking around for solutions to that, and I found nothing. And so that idea was something that percolated in the back of my head, was building the other one. And finally, then I looked at the trends and thought, maybe NLP is at a stage where we could maybe jump into that, and we could crack the back of scouring the internet for what your competitors are doing and pulling all that data into one central repo, and then squeezing and extracting the insight out of the raw intel that comes into that repository. So the pain was, and the itch I needed to scratch was, help all these people that don't know what the heck their competitors are doing, whether they're in product land, sales land, marketing land, even talent people, talent acquisition, hiring somebody from a different company. You want to know what that company's up to, and put all that into a central zone and make sense of it. And so I naively came into Klue thinking ML is going to be this big magic button that's going to solve all my problems, and let's go.
Yeah, naively. Interesting choice of words. Why do you use that word?
Yeah, well, I bought the hype. I thought we're at the stage where what we could do with ML would literally take unstructured data on one end and pull out the right themes and even summaries and produce an output of insight on the other end. And it is an extremely difficult problem, as from the taxonomies that you're looking at through to the type of content. You need to put a real tight box around the work that you're doing to try and even get close to relevancy. And then this lends back to my previous point of like overspending on something too early. We tried to get accurate, relevant content to present back to our clients. And you'd spend a lot of time going from 72% accuracy to 76% accuracy, and they wouldn't notice that 4%, right? So you could spend a lot of money moving up the percentage curve, but as it gets harder and harder to get more and more accurate as you go up that curve. And so that we realized we needed to develop a workflow that put the human in the centerpiece to be augmented by the intelligence, the ML side, rather than fully replace them. So I'm a full embracer of AI being augmented individual, and having somebody sit in the pilot seat and build all the knobs and the controls for them, but also maybe keep working on autopilot, but understand that there's a pilot in that seat for a long time.
So how does that work in practice? I mean, it sounds like you're keeping a human in the loop. Does that human sit on the client side, or is this someone on your team that may be servicing the client?
Yeah, that's another learning. So we built the entire system to be collaborative, and we built the entire system for our clients to do that shoring up of, this is relevant, this is not. I'm going to mark this as important. I'm going to share this. I'm going to add a comment to this. I'm going to reduce this corpus of an article down to this little extracted insight. All of these are cues for relevance. But unfortunately, different clients think the same article is relevant or not, and it really confuses the algorithm. When you think something is relevant and I don't, because I don't care about the stock price and you do, it totally messes up the algorithm. So we had to continue down the path of making sure that our clients could mark that stuff relevant and make sense of that information coming in, but pulled and extracted a whole bunch of other pieces out and just did pure supervised learning on that, so that using TensorFlow to manually label the data and just make sense of it so that we could develop pure models on what we believed was relevant based on certain set of assumptions, and then present that back and layer it in to the conflicting information we might get across different clients.
Got it. And so as you have these conversations with the client, are they at all interested in, hey, this is a cool application of artificial intelligence? Does that become a competitive advantage for you? Or is the way it's presented, in the UI such that it's, look, there's a ton of AI in Apple, but like it feels very much like a video game, something not very intelligent. I'm curious what that dynamic is like.
Yeah, I think, look, I'll bring it all the way back. Like, my competition is a 6-month-old PowerPoint deck that's 17 pages sitting on a shared drive somewhere. right? That's my competition.
Mm.
Out of date, irrelevant information. So what all of my clients want is to take the 3 million plus pieces of intel that we ingest daily and give them a summary of what's important. So that's a continued mission that we keep trying to get to. It's been 6 years we've been trying to make that vision a reality. And even if we get those 3 million pieces of information down to 100, we still need a human to do a bit of work because 100 is still too many. So I would say, if your question is more like how magical does it feel?
Yeah.
It's still not magic. In fact, we actually talk about that in our sales cycles a lot. There is no magic button. There's an assist button. There's something that makes you more efficient, incredibly more efficient than you manually going and finding this, cutting and pasting, building and curating notes down to something that is of value. We can make somewhere between 8 to 12x more effective or efficient in your job. But you still got to do work. And like, I don't understand your web security or cybersecurity business. So you're going to need to provide the lens of understanding of what's relevant and how to say that to your sales team in a way that my ML is not going to be able to spit out. So I would say most of our clients have been learned and taught not to look for magic and are actually just saying, does this deliver efficiency for me?
Yeah, and the end user, is that generally the sales team? To your point, you were tired of going in and your sales team previously not having answers to what competitors are doing. Is that the focus now, giving that information to sales teams?
Yeah, we have a two-tiered model here. So we have curators and consumers. So salespeople are very much the consumers. Again, we built the whole system to be collaborative, that they would contribute intel, they provide their voice of what matters, what's relevant, what's contextually important to them. They don't do any of that. They're like,
yeah, I was going to say,
me. No,
give me you can't even get them to fill out what information in the CRM.
Exactly. Even the competitor field, they barely fill it in. So yeah, so they need to be fed. They need to be spoon-fed what the relevant bits are. They need effectively the equivalent of that old school battle card that has 6 boxes on it that you laminate and you print out on your desk. They need that in a dynamic way. So that is effectively what our curators are producing for them. And they're using Klue to be very efficient in the production and updating of those battle cards and in-depth profiles of competitors. And so two-tiered, the product marketer typically is that curator. They're the ones that are going to do the work. They're going to produce the materials. Salespeople are the consumers, as our product people, as our marketers, as our strategy people, as our talent acquisition people, run the course of each of the divisions. Consumers, curators, that's how we see it.
That makes a lot of sense. And so I'm curious what the kind of, is it a dashboard where if I'm on a sales call, I'll have kind of a battle card pop up and I can speak to those specific things? And does this also work with field sales?
Yeah,
what used to be field sales?
yeah. It's a good question. So we have this concept of Klue everywhere. And so if a competitor, say your competitor is Slack, and you need to know about their products, their positioning, their pricing, their new features, some of the release notes, what to say. If you're Microsoft Teams and you're trying to compete against Slack, what do you say? Why do you win? Why do you lose? What are the areas, the landmines you need to lay about what Slack can't do, what they can't? There's highly curated information like that. And then there's basic information like what's their headcount like and their growth. We can automate some of the easy stuff, and some of the later stuff, the curators are going to build those custom cards based on some of the intel that we brought in for them. But ultimately, what they want at the sales end is in a tab, basically, show me everything I should know about Slack, everything I should know about Cisco, everything I know, and effectively call it a screen full of information. And they don't want to scroll a lot. They want to get what their answer is. So generally, we think of it as 3 layers. We think you could search. There's a little Chrome extension with Klue that you can hit a button, search for any card that your product marketers created, and get the response. Tell me if they discount in Q4. Boom, here's your answer. That's one. The second layer is, what should I need to know about this competitor? Screen full of information. We think of that as the battle card. Why do you win? Why do you lose? What's the pricing? That goes in there. And then behind that is the full repository of cards on that competitor. There might be 100 cards that is all the details about product pricing, positioning, and everything that you need. And that's called a board. And so it lives in there. Generally, our salespeople aren't living in that. They're living using the extension, hitting a button and searching, pulling up a battle card, or even waiting for the digest to hit their Slack channel or their inbox. It says, these are the top 5 things you need to know about your market and competitors this week.
Got it. Got it. Very helpful. And you alluded to some of the data sources that you all are pulling to feed these algorithms, right? It sounds like, look, you can pull information from the CRM to help you understand why you win, why you lose, why you win against certain competitors, why you lose against other competitors, and then dynamic information that happens in the public domain relative to what a competitor is doing. That's a ton. So at the end of the day, it's a ton of information. Obviously, with anything related to AI, machine learning, right, features become very important. I'm curious, as the team worked together, how were you all able to refine what data is important, what data can you just pay less attention to, I should say?
That's a great question, and continually learning what matters for different clients and different sectors. So let me give you a little more finer detail on the collection side. So think of Klue as like, we collect a bunch of data, we curate it, and then people consume it, right? 3 buckets. But within each of these 3 buckets, there's at least 2 halves. On the collection side, there's internal data that lives in our client systems. So Slack conversations, lots of data there. A recording of a sales call in Gong, lots of data there. Salesforce, lots of data there. These are all data points that only live with our clients. It's proprietary to them and it's not readily available publicly. But we fish a lot of data out of there. They manually throw stuff into Klue from there, and Klue becomes like the central repo for that internal competitive related. And then we send our bots out and we do scraping on the web, and we do articles, reviews. LinkedIn is next to impossible, so we can't do that. We've tried. But millions of websites and sources, including like we'll put beacons on our competitors' websites to know down to the pixel what's changed on each page that we care about, their management page, their positioning page, their client case studies page, their pricing page, and we keep track of that over time. So there's all this external data and all this internal data, and we want to bring that together. We do create, in terms of how people can see, there's like automated cards that will update automatically, like press releases that they've launched or tweets and these will be filtered, but effectively automated information coming in. And then the why we win and why we lose, that tends to be our curators looking at the information we've gathered, like a review that says they suck for these reasons, or a Slack post that salesperson said, we won because of these, or in Salesforce, they pulled it out. And then they'll shape it into nice tight bullet points of say this to win, avoid this because you're going to get hammered. And that's where the custom cards live right next door to those automated cards.
And definitely a way to drive more sales or to ultimately increase that win rate. Now, before you guys got started though, at some point there was no data, right? Or there was just public data. Did you have to start only leveraging public data, or were you able to partner with certain firms who you'd go through a pilot and they provide you some data? What did the early days look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is part of the learning where you screw up in the early days, you make assumptions, they're wrong, you iterate on them. Our first assumption was we could just build a database of intel that people could search through and get tons of value from and pay us money. And that was public, available, external intel. But Crunchbase does that pretty well for private companies. And there's a bunch of other companies that do that public data organization relatively well. If you're an investor, PitchBook might help, Bloomberg, those are companies that do it. And so as we started to build more of that with our own private company lens on it, we had all of this input from our clients saying, well, hold on, I see this article that you give me in this database that you're showing me. And I have my salespeople posting a similar article in Slack or emailing something similar. And And like, I don't know if that's the same article as you found or not. And suddenly I've got my inbox and I've got like your database, and I'm going to trust my inbox over your database. So I'm finding, unless those two worlds combine, I'm not going to use your system. And that was how we got into the internal side and said, well, will you give us? And they were like, yeah, I'll do that if you're willing to do the work. And so we did have a number of beta clients that give us access, and then said, well, this is part of our offering. Now you have to have internal and external. And then what happens is you get way too much crap.
I was going to ask you
got to get it down.
that.
Oh yeah. Well, this is where the human and the ML come in, and it's like, and that's a never-ending challenge, because every time we think we've got most of the data in there, along comes something like Gong or Course that records sales calls and converts all the audio into text, and suddenly you got a new terabyte amount of information. So it never ends, the new sources that come up. So the real value of Klue is in trying to get the extracted insight out of that raw corpus of information that you're shoving into it. And I would say we started heavy thinking ML was going to do it, went swinging the entire other direction to just give the human workflow tools to drag, drop, and do it. And then now we're somewhere in between, them both. But it's still, man, there's still way too much noise. If I had a magic button, I'd use it.
Were there any particular learning lessons that you had behind, right? Because you need some very talented people to be able to work with this data, build models, work with the algorithms. Were there any learning lessons you had, given that you had so many different swings, so many different kind of changes behind how you should think about bringing together a team that can handle creating a product that leverages data, artificial intelligence?
So there's probably two bits there. One are some of the learnings that we did in trying to crunch that data into relevance. And then the other is the team formation, right? So crunching the data down, I think I mentioned, like, we had to move some of the information to like a supervised machine learning TensorFlow approach to training and manually labeling the data, like classic supervised learning from our corpus, not relying on our clients because there was confusion there. So that took a while for us to learn. And we didn't want to give up on just having the tool automatically figure it out based on signals from our clients' usage, but finally we needed to figure that, we needed to augment it. So that was kind of on the relevancy side. On the team side, it was really interesting, because again, in the earliest days, you're a tiny little startup.
Yeah.
People barely want to give you money. And
Yeah.
so like you either will raise a ton of money because you came out of OpenAI or you came out of Google and you have this street cred as a double doctored PhD on some paper academically on AI that you could do it. But for the majority of us, we have to make a little bit of money. And that means taking some of the open source work that's available, leveraging what you can, and actually putting it in place. And your team then can't be academic, pure data scientists. They have to be data engineers that are actually doing some of the work and implementing some of the ML models while doing back-end work. And that was a real challenge. Like, we had this binary view of people coming out of academia that were brilliant on the data science side, but wouldn't code. And then you had other people that were developers that were coding that didn't have a lot of the machine learning kind of exposure.
Right.
Now that world's blurring wonderfully. And there's so much that if you're an engineer, you could pick up off the shelf, library-wise, and run with. Whereas even 5 years ago, that just wasn't possible. So now I think the teams are very much data engineers. And now that we're bigger, we can layer in more data science pure play, kind of ivory tower folks.
Yeah.
But we still live in the data engineers mixing both ML and backend right now.
And do you have a particular approach in terms of who the right fit is for you? I know now you can get some more of academia, but is it someone who has to have maybe an industry focus or experience within a certain industry? Are there these kind of what they call purple squirrels, where they have this combination of sales experience and then maybe I switched over to being a data scientist or programmer? So I'm curious about the profile of someone who would be a great fit for what you guys do on the AI side.
Yeah, I've never seen a purple squirrel. Let me know if you come across one of those. Those sound interesting. So my take on this is back to the data engineering side. Again, I found, I think if you're small, if your audience is folks starting companies, I think you want to find somebody that's going to code ultimately. And so there's a lot of people, particularly back-end devs, that are very interested in learning ML and want to experiment in ML. So we had an early advisor that was, he ran the comp sci department at the local university and actually built an early AI app called Zeit that CNN went on to buy, taking Twitter inputs and personalizing your news feeds based on that. And he was the one that gave us the advice. He's like, you'll spend so much money if you just hire data science and pure ML people, because they'll want to geek out on just the cool stuff on ML. And you want to have a product, and you're going to be stuck having spent all your money without anything that somebody could totally buy. And we didn't have the luxury of massive VC funding to kick it. If you do have that luxury, power to you. Go down that deep path. If you don't, then I think you're looking to find that balance between taking what's open source available, keeping up to date on what the latest papers are, and tinkering with an engineer's mindset on how to implement some of that. And I'd say still that's our ethos today.
Yeah, a lot of folks viewing are startups, but then you also have enterprises who they want to experiment with AI, but the budget is limited, right? They're not Google, they're not Netflix, who already have this kind of knowledge base built up. Couple things that I would love to learn more from you, and these are going to be more quick fire type of questions. One is, if you could go back to day one, knowing everything now, what would be the one or two things you would consult yourself? Well, let's just make it one. What would be the one thing you would say to yourself that would help you scale more quickly?
I thought you were going to go down the mistake path, and I'd say not spend $1 million on pure ML in the beginning. The thing that would help me scale quickly, frankly, is still back to the basics of lean principles of building a business. You need to be as ugly but real with your prototypes as you possibly can, and then take that to your potential buyers and iterate on feedback with as limited dev money spend as possible. So you can do a lot with mocks now, and there's tools like, InVision and Figma do great jobs. You can wireframe your way through a lot of stuff now without an expensive group of particularly ML developers doing stuff. And you can do the imagine this world, and then really truly understand whether or not people would pay for that. That's the other thing. Like, I always use this. I always say, if you're thinking about starting a business, you need to have 100 smart person meetings, and you need to start every smart person meeting with, tell me the God's honest truth. If this is a dumb idea, I need you to tell me my haircut's ugly, not say, yeah, it looks good. But there's really nothing in it for somebody to tell you your haircut's ugly. So you have to draw that out of them. You have to say, please do that, because it's going to waste a ton of my time if this is a bad idea. And if you premise it with that level of honesty, then they'll give you hard feedback if they are a smart, exposed people. So everything from the PhD of NLP and a revered ML guy that's at DeepMind that was giving us early advice, through to a successful entrepreneur, through to a salesperson that might consume some of this data. That was like, I would iterate my ass off on low fidelity, instructional oriented, not high dev iterations of my product, and make sure that there's a real market. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Next question for you. You mentioned data labeling. You did that internally. Any thoughts behind, or any reason specifically why you did it internally versus outsourcing? No. And actually, we've moved to outsource. We've tried one company for an outsource. We're trying another company for an outsource. I think the parameters are very tight. And in our case, is this about a company or not, a competitor that we're looking at? So Slack, for instance, has 17 companies called Slack, and John Slack Jr. running for mayor. Well, that's a pretty easy one to get Slack, the company that's doing collaborative stuff. Is it relevant about Slack? That's a little more nuanced, and certain companies are better poised to do that than, say, Fiverr in India or like, so I think you need a little more expertise there, but no, absolutely. Now we have no desire to do it internally and want to outsource all of that with good parameters.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, last couple questions here. One person that inspires you either in AI or in business generally.
Oh, wow. Well, the person that inspires me most and the secret man crush is Mark Andreessen. If you hear that man speak, and whether it's blockchain, whether it's AR, VR, whether it's AI, whether it's building businesses, including the first web browser, like the intellect on that man is so impressive, and you're so humbled in hearing him speak that you're actually listening and trying to catch up to his brain speaking. So he is somebody that I revere and would love to one day meet and talk about what we're doing, not just on AI, but any range of subjects, right? So yeah, he's a legend.
And I even think about, he's seen a ton of companies scale, and you guys are, I mean, I think that the interesting space that you guys are in is you're actually a tool to help folks scale more quickly and more efficiently. So anyone can relate to that, right?
Anyone who's got a competitor, that is that everyone? Yes, should be.
Everyone, yeah. The funny thing is everyone thinks they have this new novel idea, and somewhere there's another person that's building the exact same thing, which is, okay, so I'm gonna go on a tangent a little bit here. When I speak to a lot of folks in tech, there's such a focus on IP related to the tech. The way I always think about business is the tech doesn't matter if you can't sell it. So the IP is really your sales process. How efficiently can you scale top line? And maybe, I mean, you can't, maybe not day one, but if you can perfect that, that is IP that is more valuable that you should have in your business than anything else. Personal opinion.
I think that's exactly aligned with how I think my nuanced lens on it would be speed is everything. We've had multiple opportunities to put patents together, and maybe we'll regret it, but we focused on speed and trying to get our product faster to market, iterate on the next thing. And speed is, frankly, I think the biggest weapon that a startup has. Yeah. You can iterate and change faster. You can move faster. So speed, whether it's your sales process, whether it's your product dev process, speed is everything. Yeah. So I'm wholeheartedly aligned with that thinking.
Well, along those lines, are there specific metrics that you all are citing to customers that represent the ROI that the product that that Klue provides?
Yeah, for Klue, it's we actually literally connect our data to Salesforce usage. So if you're a sales rep and you're using Klue, what was your win rate looking like before Klue helped you versus after? And then how do we compare that to all the other reps and their frequency of usage of the content that the compete team is putting together and their win rate? And it's not just win rate, and this is in the sales sector specifically, which is easiest to attach to revenue. We'll look at the direct correlation between, say, Group A that barely uses or didn't use Klue inside the company because it tends to be a natural set, and Group B that is, and look at their win rate, look at their effectiveness, so including how quickly do they close business? Is it faster because they were mitigating a competitor earlier? And then lastly, even discounts. So there's nothing like getting towards the end of a deal with a competitor still involved and suddenly you're discounting all the way down because you want the deal. And that means you haven't mitigated on value earlier, which generally means if you haven't done a good job with the competitors, you're going to sell for less. So between discounts, time to close, and most importantly, the impact on win rate, we measure all of that and provide our clients with impact analysis on a frequent basis.
Everything you said, I can also think about that from the perspective of recruiting, right? How long does it take you to hire? How many people do you have in the pipeline? How long does it take to convert someone? All of those things are direct. You spoke to sales, but those are directly relevant to other parts of the organization.
Yeah, if you're a product manager, it's probably a little more like features. Everyone's got features that the competitors are making either a benchmark or that you shouldn't care about. Right? You don't want to copy your competitor outright unless you're getting crushed because that's a feature that you've got to have. So if I can't call my Uber and Lyft can, I think you need to build that feature. So there's going to be features that are core. And I think from a product manager standpoint, they want to know, should I bother prioritizing those features? So the nuance would be, what are the competitors doing relative to your roadmap, and how much success are they having with those features across a client base? And that might be their lens.
Last question for you. Favorite tech tool to use in the organization? Or maybe most productive tech tool?
How do I not be unoriginal? Like, our tech stack
Don't
is
say
so.
Klue.
I know, I won't say Klue. I mean, we live and breathe on Slack and Zoom, and it's been that way since we started the company. Basically, we're early adopters of both technologies. So we literally, like, right beside me is a whole bunch of faces in my company right now on a separate iPad of them working away independently on their desks while we're locked at home to just feel a little bit of connection. That's an on and always on Zoom. And I've had, since we've been chatting here, at least 30 Slack messages come up. And so it is for sure our most highly used. But I would say one of the nuanced ones that we're just experimenting with is a fellow craft portfolio company called ClickUp. And it's a really interesting technology that kind of blends actually Slack-like functionality, which we haven't fully adopted, more like task management and workflow across the organization. It's like a Notion meets Asana and meets a Slack. And we're just experimenting with right now, but it's showing great promise.
Yeah, I've heard that name a few times. I'm going to have to dig in a little bit more, given it's starting to pop up. So, all right, Jason, well, this was super helpful. I think you were able to provide a lot of insights into how you all were able to get to where you are, especially with some of the learning lessons that you have. So I look forward to the feedback and the jewels that other folks were able to learn. And lastly, where can we find you?
So our direct website is klue.com. That's Klue with a K. Somehow Klue with a C was taken. We took Klue with a K. klue.com. If anybody wanted to email me directly and talk about whether it's ML, building businesses, or working at a rocket ship startup.
There we go. We'll make sure we get all of those things linked so folks can find you pretty easily. All right, Jason, well, thanks for having y'all. I'll give you some of your time back for the day. Appreciate you joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.